Tom asks if you can add an area to a single page. And yes, you can. That was kind of one of the reasons that we wanted single pages to. Single pages really are um, like they really are like reusable pages or pages of a certain type. They have IDs in the same way. They can have versions as well. They can have blocks in them. They really the only difference is uh, how their template is loaded. So if I look at my about page, whatever page of that type that is, its left sidebar, it loads that from the template as we've seen from this left sidebar. But if I look at a page on the front end of my site, like it's a good example that we can actually see. If I enable the user profile stuff in concrete5, these are public profiles. You can see this page right here where there's editing stuff for things like my email address, change password, things like that. You'll notice that's found at /profile. This has a CID as well. It has versions, it has everything. But if I look at the design of the page, it says this page is a single page, which means it doesn't have a page type associated with it. And so what that means is that single pages load their template from profile/view.php, but from within here, these can totally have blocks in them. And profile is a good example of this because if I edit this page, I get my global areas that are at the top, any global areas at the bottom still work, and there is a main area here. So if you want to show particular instructions on a profile page, you can add them here. Now this profile page is reused for all users who happen to be using it, so it may not, it's hard, you might have to write custom blocks if you wanted to, for example, show certain content just to certain users when they view their user profile page. But for example, there is a block in the marketplace that's a content block that has placeholders in it. So you could write a paragraph and then insert a placeholder for the user, the currently viewing username. Something along the lines of hello username, this type of thing, like a mail merge field. And then anytime that person the user's viewing this block, it swaps out with the currently viewing username. And that's a perfect thing to have added as a block to this profile page. So yes, single pages can have blocks in them. 1 second. Oscar wants to know how to get information from another page's attribute. Good question. I have a bit in here that we can start talking a bit about attributes, so I can probably jump right ahead to that one. And I'm going to, this is just a little taste of how concrete5's API works. I'm going to create a custom tool script. I'm going to create a custom tool script that might show off how some of this stuff works. So I created a tool script called attributes test. If I go to index.php tools attributes test, you'll see it says testing. That shows that it's working properly. Since I do prepend it with index.php and /tools and attributes test, it's running through concrete5. And now I'm free to use this in a way that I can write concrete5 API calls. So this line of code here is basically saying, get me the home page object. And the home page in concrete5 always has the ID of 1. And I'm getting the most recent version of it. That's what the second parameter does. And then let's say I wanted to, from that page object, get a particular attribute. A good attribute would be, let's say, meta name. So this is a built-in custom attribute that is used to populate the meta name field that's found within up here. Actually, it's used to populate the title of the page, but only if it's set. So let's say I go in here and I add meta title. Welcome to my website. If I save this, you'll notice my tab now says welcome to my website. And then if I come into my attributes test, this first line here is going to print out the actual name of the home page, which is found in this name field, just home. And then I'm going to be printing out the attribute meta title for the home page object. And you can see that home gets printed out first, and then welcome to my website gets printed out second. And basically, whenever you're working with either a page object or a file object or a user object, you can run the get attribute function on it and pass the attributes handle, which again is all lowercase with no spaces. You pass that to the get attribute function, and it will print out a text version of that attribute type. And so this is kind of a contrived example. I don't think you would do this per se, but you might use the built-in page list class to get a list of pages and loop through all of them. So this is an example of basically using the concrete5 API to grab all the pages on your site and print out their name, and if they have meta title, print that out as well. So you can see that I've done that, and that's what it looks like. And then, you know, the page list class is pretty well documented on our site. You can filter it by a number of things. You can get it in batches of 10 at a time. It's what we use to make the back-end search in the dashboard work. It's a pretty powerful class. So get attribute is a way to get any attribute on a page in a clean, simple way. Joyce asks about overrides. Please explain upgrade, subdirectory, naming conventions, SQL backup location, and name location of override code for that version, and how to downgrade if needed. Yeah, so this sounds like about upgrades. This is a good question. So when you're performing a concrete5 upgrade through update concrete5, there's a couple different ways you can do it. And unfortunately, none of them have a seamless rollback that happens from within concrete5. So what we typically encourage people to do is to make a backup of their database prior to running the upgrade, run the upgrade, and if something goes horribly wrong, put the database back using PHP myadmin or the MySQL command line, something along those lines. There is a built-in database export tool called Backup Database. You can run this backup, and it will actually let you restore things like that, but this is for smallish sites. I don't know that I would use this on a site like the size of concrete5.org, for example. We've approached the idea of perhaps making rolling back to a previous upgrade something that happens a bit more, that could happen a bit more automatically, but we're not quite there yet. But this does make it really easy to download a copy of your database and things like that. And so when you're doing a concrete 5 upgrade, there's a couple different ways you could do it. There's before in version 5.4 we introduced the ability to download the upgrade from us, and when you do that through us, is actually kind of the best of both worlds. If you download the upgrade through us from within the dashboard, it drops the update into the updates directory, but it doesn't actually upgrade until you tell it to. And when you upgrade through the dashboard, that does two things. The first thing it does is it adds a pointer to my site.php that says, I'm using an updated core, so look in this particular section for this updated core, and that core has to be found within the updates directory. And then once it does that, it runs through all the database changes that would be needed to facilitate that new code. This is the added benefit of only upgrading exactly when you want to and kind of minimizing downtime, because you don't have to worry about, in the past we counseled people to replace their concrete directory and then visit the tools required upgrade script. And while that worked, if they were using FTP to copy over the concrete directory, there could be a lot of time between that starting and that finishing, and then during that time your site might be weird or half upgraded or something crazy. So and then plus you could also rename your concrete directory and swap it out the core, but again, that results in downtime, whereas the updates approach really it flips the switch and runs the upgrade code in the same procedure, and so there's very, very little downtime, if any, that occurs at that point. So in general, what I would counsel people to do is upgrade through the dashboard, and if you do that, you'll never see this. You'll never see this screen. If you do decide to upgrade your site by deleting the concrete directory and replacing it with the new core, then you will need to visit this page. If your core is newer than the version that is stored within the database, it will provide you an upgrade button. You'll click it, you'll continue on, and it will work seamlessly. Again, there's no rollback for it, but in general, that would be as simple as replacing it with the previous core and replacing your database with a snapshot of the database taken prior to upgrading. And continuing right along, I'm going to talk a little bit about blocks. So you're all probably pretty familiar with blocks because it's one of concrete5's sort of coolest selling points. Blocks are just reusable bits of functionality that can be added to areas right through the UI. Concrete5 ships with what we call a bunch of different block types. So anytime you want to add a block to your site, you see all the different types of blocks that are installed. Some of these blocks are purely basic presentation stuff like content, which is just HTML, but we wrap it up in a nice instance of the TinyMCE WYSIWYG editor. If you just want to literally paste HTML without TinyMCE screwing it up for you, you can just add a copy of the HTML block to a page. The image block is a way of adding an image to a page and then perhaps constraining the dimensions of in a certain way, linking an image to a different page, that type of stuff. And it can get as powerful as adding a complete form to a page. So a form block is the most complex block that we ship by default and lets you do stuff like add a form to a page. And these answer types probably look a lot like attributes, although they're not attributes, they're just special The form is its own beast, completely separate. And now I've added a form to my right-hand side of my page. So there's a lot of, each block handles lots of stuff differently, but there's a lot of common elements to a block. All the different block types show up in that list. They all have add and edit interfaces. They all have a view layer such that it is, and they all have a behind the scenes PHP script that controls how that block works. And that is how the blocks are bundled, as well as sort of how they work at a conceptual level. So if I open my concrete directory, concrete/blocks directory, you'll see that for every block type in my system, I have a folder. So the one we just added is form. There's the HTML one is in here. It's pretty simple. All of these are self-contained and pretty easy to understand. If I look through the HTML block, I'll add this here. If I edit this, you see it loads up the HTML. Let's take a look through some of the stuff that's found in here. The add.php file is what shows up when you add this block, when you add an instance of this block to a page. So this block, all it's doing is including a file called formsetup.html, and this is just a text area. So all of the stuff, like all of the cancel, add, all of the Chrome at the top of the window, that type of stuff, that's all controlled by other stuff. Block types just include in their add and edit templates the stuff that really is specific to that block. Blocks have an icon.php. That's just what shows up in the list. And then there's view.php and controller.php. Controller.php is that is the script that controls how that block works. So controller gets run before a block is shown. Basically, all the different views that happen with a particular block, like add, edit, or view, those, if they can have an optional controller method of the same name that gets run before, and then it just sets content into the view. And a very blocks are some of the strongest MVC components in concrete5, such that if you code blocks, and there is a training specifically about how to code your own blocks, which is very easy for a developer to do. You don't have to build a full package to install blocks in concrete5. Installing your own blocks is really, really simple for a developer, and really powerful, and highly recommended if you want to make a site that looks and functions a certain way. If your blocks are simple and don't need to store tons of data, you don't even probably have to write any SQL to save that data at all. So you'll see that this save method just passes its content into a parent save function, and it figures out how to store that stuff in the database. And we don't really have a ton of time to talk completely about blocks, since I want to get into more Q&A. And there is a full training devoted to exactly how that stuff works. But the blocks are, one of the neatest things that concrete5 can do, and I'd be happy to talk more at length if people have questions about that stuff. Building your own block is pretty easy to do. I've included a sample block that I built for a client at one point years ago, called contact information. And as you might imagine, in order to install this block into the system, you add this block to the root blocks directory, so the override block directory, and you just go into the dashboard block types list. Here, this lists all of the block types found in the site, and then above it all, it shows which blocks are awaiting installation under the custom block types header, and sidebar contact information is there. And now that I've installed it, that block shows up at the bottom of the list with certain fields that would be useful for whatever project that was. Okay, I'm going to answer some questions at the moment. Jason asks, is there an easy way to tie a custom attribute to a block? I suppose it depends on what you'd be trying to accomplish. If you're, the answer off the top of my head is no, but you, for business purposes, you may, there may be, you wouldn't necessarily, it depends on what you're trying to do. So blocks don't really need their own attributes the same way pages and users do, because blocks are kind of built to be extendable in this way. So I guess if you needed to add a bit of data to a block, I would just suggest forking that block and adding the relevant field at the bottom of the block in some capacity, and then changing the block's database table to save that data as well. There's no way to add an attribute to a block that exists as sort of an extra little bit of data. However, you can, from within a block's view layer, reference custom attributes that are on pages and things like that. So if, for example, you had a sidebar contact information block that you added to a page that you then wanted to display the current and display an attribute, you could definitely do that. So let's say I've got meta title here. If I have my contact information block here, and I add something in there, it says contact information. If I go into view and I do something like C equals page, get current page, print C, get attribute meta title, all of a sudden my block, this is an interesting little lesson, my block should show this immediately. However, this block, in an effort to be performance friendly, is set up to cache fairly aggressively, because it knows that if it actually hasn't been changed through the UI, it doesn't need to grab a new copy of its view layer. But since I just changed the view layer, I need to force it to refresh. So I can go and clear the cache, or I could just disable the cache while we are doing our demo, which probably makes more sense. And so now you can see below the contact information, I have welcome to my website. If I were to add this contact information block to a different page, it would inherit the meta title of whatever page it happens to be on. So while that isn't necessarily binding a custom attribute to the block exactly, the blocks can interact with custom attributes on files that are attached to them. They can work with custom attributes for whatever page they happen to be on, that type of stuff. So the answer is kind of yes and no. So hopefully that helps a bit. Oscar asks if it would be possible to add a choose template dropdown right in the add edit block window. This is a good question. We've talked about this a bit. I can imagine that being useful. Right now, there's no easy way to do that, but we might revisit that. I think if you're not familiar with that, concrete5, all blocks have the concept of a custom template. And so custom templates are basically additional view layers that blocks can have, which don't have their own controllers or their own add and edit layers, but they have their own additional view layers, and they could optionally have their own CSS and JavaScript. So if I go up to this header nav, for example, and hit custom template, you can see that I have none selected right now, so it's just using the default. but I could say use a breadcrumb custom template, which renders this menu as though it were a breadcrumb. And so what Oscar's asking is, could it be possible to, right now, if I were to add an auto nav block to here, I have to add it before I can then go back to the custom template and change it into breadcrumb. You know, if we were to approach the idea of working with this, we would probably standardize on adding this across the board to all blocks in a sort of tabbed way. So you'll notice the AutoNav has a preview pane, which is helpful, but the AutoNav had to code this. We had to code that specifically for the AutoNav. Not all blocks have those. So I can imagine us in the future adding a custom template and making all blocks have this little tabbed interface with preview across the top. But right now, there's no easy way to consolidate those views. So you're going to have to make do with having the additional custom template click. Having multiple databases in blocks packages. You know, it's, if we've definitely worked with, since concrete5 is, you know, a framework on top of PHP that does connect to, that does use an object-oriented approach to connecting to databases. We have worked on projects where we connect to multiple databases using ADODB and switch back and forth between them as necessary. We've also used custom forms and custom blocks to connect to completely external data sources. So sources where you need to query an external API can definitely all be done from within block controllers. So it's really just, there's no simple way to do that. You're going to be writing your own PHP code to do that, but it's definitely possible using the libraries that we either provide or that, you know, you can get installed through PHP. Brant asks how to create a single page that takes in data like name, thumbnail, description, or date. How would I create a block or other single page that pulled that info from the database? Well, you know what might be useful to you, Brant, is this add-on that I wrote at one point called the example FAQ add-on. This is ostensibly an FAQ package, but it was really written more toward this exact problem that you have. So if I actually connect to the concrete5 marketplace, I can download this and we can step through it reasonably quickly, at least get our feet wet with it. This is called example FAQ. Currently, oh, it has been updated for 5.5, so that's good. This was officially not concrete5 5 compatible, although it worked just fine. We just hadn't exactly made it look perfect. So I can download that archive, and I will install this package. Now that I have this package available, I can go into my add functionality section. An example FAQ shows up. This creates a new section of my dashboard called example FAQ. And here's an example of a single page that adds, that has different fields in it, which then creates new pages. So what I would, excuse me, what I would recommend you do, Dan, is approach this, unless there's really no reason, unless you really don't want to display this data somewhere, I would explore using concrete5 pages as kind of a lightweight object model for this type of stuff. So create your single page, and when I actually fill out this form, I have to actually define a couple sections of my site for where this is going to go. Oh, did I not get it? Hmm. Oh, well, that was odd. That took a second to propagate out. Okay. Um, so when I add this FAQ, um, it actually adds a new page underneath my About section. And then this page in the dashboard is responsible for retrieving these pages and displaying stuff like this. So if you take a look at how this package works, you can go into this dashboard section and look at the you can look at the single page section. You can see how the form submits to a particular action in the controller, for the example FAQ, and it uses the concrete5 API to add a new page of a particular type. And then later on, we retrieve pages found under there and then use the concrete5 API to get the data out. So I would really explore creating a form, that a single page, which when you post the form, creates a new page somewhere in concrete5 and sets attributes on that page for the data that you want to store, and then retrieve it using a single page that calls a page list. So this FAQ list is just an instance of this page list class, which you can then sort in a certain way, and you can filter by a section of your site, and then you can just loop through every page that it finds. And once you loop through that, the thing that you're going to be working with is the page object, which you can just call get attribute on. You could grab all the blocks that you've added to the page. You could really manipulate it programmatically pretty easily. Dan asks a good question. This is actually the last item on my list, and I didn't even plan it this way. Dan asks, is there a good general rule of thumb for using blocks versus page attributes? Blocks seem easier for editors, but attributes seem to give devs more power. Is updating page attributes through a block a bad idea? Um, I wouldn't necessarily draw exactly that distinction, because we do we use both, and editors have to understand both. So editors have to understand that when they're mousing over sidebar and they click edit, I mean, they don't have to know that that's exactly a block, but they have to know that that's usually pretty easy for people to get, because they see it in the page, and it's concrete5's promise of in context editing. We also expect at least a decent webmaster using concrete5 to understand at least the concept of page attributes, insofar as they work with stuff like exclude from nav or the SEO. So in general, the distinction I would draw is that um, anytime you have content that you want to repurpose on a page, and by on a page I mean something that actually shows up visibly when you navigate to a page, I would make that a block. The only time when that isn't the case is when it's also going to be used, when it's sort of standard bits of content used throughout the site, like the title of a page or something like that. Then I wouldn't necessarily make that then I wouldn't necessarily make that a block. So for example, um, um, welcome is the name of this page, but it's also part of this block because it shows up in this content area. But I could easily see getting rid of that. That's kind of funky looking. Getting rid of that and then printing out the title of the page above this block. In general, that's how we decide on whether things should be blocks. And if we want to store data about the page that might be displayed occasionally, but may be more worked with programmatically from elsewhere, or displayed in a way that would make editing it through the WYSIWYG editor or through the front end interface difficult, then we typically make them attributes. So, for example, all this meta stuff, you could make those blocks that are just HTML, just plain text blocks, but throughout the course of normally operating on a page, it would be strange. We thought it would be strange to come to a page, put a page in edit mode, and then all of a sudden see a bunch of new stuff appear at the top that was, SEO stuff. It doesn't really work from a what you see is what you're editing type of approach. So we decided to, while all of this stuff could have been blocks at one point, we decided to keep any bit of data about a page that isn't really being displayed in the given view of a page, in the page's flow. We decided to keep those as attributes. That said, there's really no reason, you might not have to do this very often, but we have had to, we've created blocks that modify the attribute in a page. So, for example, or work together with that. For example, in concrete5.5, we added some new blogging stuff, and we included FAQ tags. So, oh, that's actually part of my add-on. Never mind. The built-in tags thing is up here called tags. If I add these to a page, those are attributes. But if I add the tags block, which is meant to display the tags for a given page in the page, well, then we thought, well, it would be kind of weird to see this tags block in the page, but then not be able to edit it from within the page, because that goes against the WYSIWYG promise. So if I update this now and I publish my edits, oh, did that not work for some reason? Oh, I totally added these incorrectly. So now I've actually added tags to the page properly as a page attribute, and I have a tags block on the page that shows up in the sidebar. And you can see that I'm actually displaying the pages that are the tags found on this page's tags attribute. And if I go to edit this, I see the tags here, and I can actually add to these tags here, I do believe. And if I save that, you'll see my block is different. And if I go to my page properties, custom attributes, I've added the test tag to this custom attribute all from within this block. So that's kind of what you were talking about. That's kind of what you were talking about, in that I just used a block to modify the attribute at the page level. But the reason for that is that we definitely want, tags are kind of an interesting case. We want the tags to be available as an attribute so we can sort by them, or search by them, categorize by them as a as a meta concept, but we also want to show them on the page and really hammer home the idea that Concrete5 is this cool way that you can change something right from within editing. So that's kind of the reason that we built it this way. So if you find similar stuff that you really want to be attributes for a page, but then you want to also display on a page and make editable through the CMS, then yes, you can definitely do that. And I would encourage you to look at the tags block that comes with 5.5 for just to see how we kind of did that. Subash asks, what is the best way to add attachments to mail? There really isn't. The Concrete5 mail helper doesn't really do this. However, we have done this on our own. We've done this using the Zen mailer. The Concrete5 mail helper actually wraps the Zen mail, Zend underscore mail library from the Zen framework, and I would probably take a look at how that works, since it is included in Concrete5, and they do have support for adding attachments to email messages. Where Tom asks, where would you find the custom templates for a block, and is it easy to override one or add another? Yeah, that's a good question. Custom templates can be found within a blocks directory. So if I look in the AutoNav block, you'll see there's a templates directory, and I have breadcrumb and header menu. And all I have to do to make a new one is duplicate one of these, make changes to it, and name it appropriately, and it will show up in that menu. You don't have to install it or do anything like that. If you wanted to do that in such a way that didn't fork the core, which is always a good idea, you can go into the root blocks directory and create an AutoNav directory, and then create a templates directory, and then paste in here and call this uppercase. And we're going to modify this template so that anytime it finds a name, it uppercases it. And so now, if I go back here and hit custom template, you can see that uppercase shows up here. And if I change that, it is now pulling from this template in the root directory. So that's really the easiest way. That's how custom templates work. It's really easy to make. That we tried to make them very easy to make without having to fork the core or do anything like that. So it's super easy to add them. One more thing that you might find interesting, we talk about this more in the blocks, sort of the basic block training, but just to make you interested, if I bold uppercase, let's say I wanted to add a custom template in my templates directory. If I add a directory and I move and I copy my view into this directory, I have to name it view.php. But then if I actually add view.css into this directory, it's a good. Actually, I'm going to. If I add a div around my custom template and give it a bold uppercase class, and then this will be interesting. If I then edit this and choose a custom template called bold uppercase, it pulls in. Not only does it pull in the view.php, but since I've made this a directory and included a CSS file with view.php and view.css, it will include both the it will include both the template and the CSS file. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and those all work with overrides. Oscar asks if I will go over packages and making your own package. Probably not going through all of the things you have to do to make your own package, but I definitely should give a little overview of what packages are and why you should care. So packages, the package format is a way to bundle up just about everything in Concrete 5, including blocks, themes, elements, which are the sort of reusable bits of HTML, like includes, helpers, libraries, single pages, all that stuff, into a format that can be zipped up and distributed through the marketplace. We started working on packages before the marketplace existed, but then it became obvious that including these things, making them download in the package format was a smart thing to do. So you don't need to use packages to do things like build your own blocks or use custom templates or single pages. When you're working on your own sites, it's a lot easier. You don't have to use the package format. But if you want to bundle up a whole bunch of different stuff together and redistribute it, or just keep it for as your own internal bits of tools, packages make a lot of sense. So if I look in my example FAQ, the packages directory is just something found in the root. Every package has a folder in here. My example FAQ, you can see it includes a custom template for a page list, example FAQ page list. It includes a dashboard. It includes 2 dashboard pages, the example FAQ page and the FAQ entry page. Those are single pages. And since those are in the dashboard, they automatically get added in to the existing dashboard pages. So they don't replace anything. They just get added on inside the dashboard. So if I click in here, you can see example FAQ shows up right at the end. And since it's within the dashboard, it shows up looking like the dashboard theme. And then beyond that, packages just have a controller.php, and these have certain bits of data in them. So you have to provide a package handle that has to match the directory name. You have to name your class properly. It has to extend the package class. You can tell what version of Concrete 5 minimum this package requires. You can give this package a version. You can add in a description and a name, and then there's functions for upgrading this package and installing this package. And install just runs through some Concrete 5 functions. It adds in a couple attributes. It installs single pages, and it also doesn't need to install a block because it's in custom templates don't have to be installed. They just are located anytime you reference them. So at the high level, that's what the package is for. They can get very complicated, like e-commerce in Concrete 5 has probably 10 dashboard pages, a couple different block types, some of which are very complicated. A bunch of different elements and models for doing currency. There, I mean, since it's e-commerce, there's a whole product section with custom attributes. You can install your own custom attribute types, which e-commerce does. If you want to see a package that could push the package format to the limit, I would recommend looking at e-commerce. But anything you download, anything you download from the Concrete 5 marketplace, is in the package format. And finally, if you look on concrete5.org in the documentation section in the developer's guide, I would recommend looking for, there's a pretty good tutorial for looking at packages, although I don't know why it's taking so long to, okay, there we go. Is it this one? Yeah. So if you look in, it's under System and then Packages. This shows all the different components you can add to a package, how their file system works, how the controller works. It's pretty good. And then there's some different topics, or there's some different discussions on that topic as well down there.